was voted on that the time be moved, start time be moved from 5:30 PM to 5:45 PM. And as I indicated, moving it to 5:45 PM, we did need to start our meeting on time, as we do have a hard stop at 7:15. So at this time, because we are virtual, we do have Mr. Collins that are here face to face with us. We are here in the boardroom. So I'm going to ask Ms. Wood if she will do the attendance. So as Ms. Wood calls your name, you will just need to respond present.
Ms. Bazemore? Ms. Frischberg?
Present.
I'm sorry, this is Myra. I'm present.
Hi, Myra. Ms. Coleman Farrell? Dr. Diaz? Reginald? Mary Evans? Ms. Fellman? Oh, this is her on the phone. Ms. Franklin? Randy Gabriel?
Present.
Sherelle Golden?
Present.
Charmaine?
Present.
Kristen? And Christine Gibbs.
Hi, Diane, it's Laura. I'm here now. Sorry, I was looking for the link to the meeting and then
Okay.
email it, didn't see it.
Hi, this is Tanjanika Laura. I am present.
Thank you. Okay, we have our 8. Okay, if for those of you calling by phone, if you could please identify yourself.
Okay, the caller ending in last 2 digits 00. If you can identify yourself, please.
That's the bridge, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. Um, Let me see if there's anyone else. Okay, so that may be it. I'll check with Mark because I have quite a few of them on here. Okay, so then we should be good. We're good? Okay, so at this time, we do have a quorum. I'm going to turn the meeting over to Ms. Feldman.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Welcome to call the meeting to order at 5:48. Thank you all for being here and being on time. And if we can go ahead and approve the minutes from our last meeting. Does anyone have any questions or amendments for it?
This is Randy Gabriel. I'll motion for approval of the minutes from the last meeting.
Thank you. We have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. And I didn't get your name.
Sherelle Golden.
Oh, sure. Okay. It didn't say it on there, so I wasn't sure. Terrific. Thank you very much. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Do we have anyone here for public comment? Sounds like we do not. So if we could go ahead and go forward with the update, Dr. Sheffield, that was wonderful.
Okay, again, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks everyone for joining us virtually. From our last update since we last meet, I do want to report that, as we discussed, that there were two plans that we needed to submit from the academic side to the state, and one of those plans being the instructional continuity plan. And that instructional continuity plan, as I gave an overview, was a crisis plan that every school district for the state of Florida needed to submit. And it was a plan in regards to we ever have another crisis such as this pandemic. Um, what will that look like? What will it be? To where we now have a playbook of such. So that plan was successfully submitted from my office on September the 28th. It was due on the 30th. And then the second plan was a plan that only high performing school districts had an opportunity to apply for. And it was a plan to provide an opportunity if we wanted to, districts wanted to have the flexibility of virtual education at this time that we would need to apply to seek approval to do such and wait on approval from DOE. We initially thought that we would have some leverage in regards to what that will look like, but once we received the application, it was around the synchronous blended learning. There was not much option. They gave specific guidelines in terms of what needed to occur. There are some stipulations and some challenges that we foresee as a district, but we did submit the plan to where for state approval. So we're just waiting to hear back from the state as it pertains to if there is another method of instruction that we can provide to families that are still uncomfortable having to return to brick and mortar or what have you. So that particular plan was submitted on the 29th. That was due on the 30th. So I'll just keep the group updated as we're hearing back from the state on both of those plans. And as we continue to move forward, we're just, again, just working with our families, trying to really and truly focus on the instruction of what's taking place within our classrooms and trying not to allow many of the distraction to interfere with the instruction because we know that our students definitely need our full attention in terms of trying to mitigate these losses. So, from my standpoint, that's exactly what we're doing. I mean, it's no secret everyone is hearing as it pertains to the national teacher shortage, the national shortage around our school bus drivers, school food services. It's just a shortage all around. This is not unique to Palm Beach County, it's national. So we are working on some pieces here as a system at the central office in regards to how we're going to provide and leverage support, continue to leverage support to our school centers, and at the same time, continue to provide the work here that we're having to do here centrally. So there's just some moving parts. We're navigating in those spaces, but at this time, that will conclude my update, and we'll be ready to move directly into the team that is here this afternoon with us, and that's around our ESC support services and our Masterboard analysis per the request of the group.
Before we do that, do we have any questions for Dr. Sheffield? Okay, I have a quick question that if the synchronous plan is approved, when would that be put into place?
What plan is it you're referencing?
The virtual learning plan, the synchronous learning that you'd mentioned?
Well, we do not even have a tentative approval date from the state. So once the state approved the plan, whenever that is, that's at the mercy of the state. Once they approve that plan, then of course we would have to then work with our bargaining units around the synchronous teaching and develop some systems that would have been within that plan, because again, there are challenges. And one of the challenges that we foresee is that the state is dictating that to run a classroom of synchronous learning, at least 2/3 of the students must be present face-to-face every day. And why we foresee that as a challenge is that one of those assurances specifically says a student can go and come, switch back and forth between face-to-face instruction and virtual instruction at any given time without notice. So if the student can go back and forth at any given time without notice, how can I, as the principal or the teacher, guarantee that I'm going to have 2/3 of my student present on a given day for me to be able to operate in a synchronous environment? So we're just, again, that's one of the challenge, just to give you an example. But as we're at the mercy of the state in regards to when we will hear back.
Thank you very much for the clarification, and that would be quite difficult to predict, I would imagine. So, okay, so if we could go on with the ESE presentation, please.
Thank you, Ms. Feldman. Kevin McCormick here, Director, Exceptional Student Education. I appreciate you having me here to present. I'm going to look back a little bit to ESY, all that's been done throughout the summer and then into this school year. Over the summer, as Dr. Sheffield talked about our current situation with difficulty hiring staff, we did have some similar challenges over the summer as well, but we're able to successfully provide services for all the students who attended. Based on the staff that serviced our students over the summer, we provided professional development, 15 sessions that reached over 900 staff. Because typically in the summer, although staff may be certified to teach that specific area, they don't have much experience working with students with that specific disability. So we make sure that we provide the professional development so teachers understand the students, but also understand the curriculum and materials that are there to support the students over the summer in order for students to get the services. The topics, of course, were access points instruction, assistive technology. A lot of the assistive technology relates to universal designs for learning. So to use our technology in making sure that students are able to access their curriculum. IEP goal monitoring, reading instruction, social skills, and behavior. We also provided professional development throughout Google Classroom to over 600 staff to make sure that we could truly cater to the specific needs of the teachers who are providing services over the summer. Just a brief update from then, we are now offering for this current school year over 130 different professional development opportunities for teachers, paraprofessionals, other ESE service providers such as SLPs and other therapists. Moving on to Child Find services, over the summer we did 119 screenings, 78 evaluations, 74 ESE eligibility and placements. And this year added 2 additional teams to Child Find. One is specifically for our Haitian Creole families, and another Spanish team in the Eastern Central region. So we're really trying to ramp up the Child Find services to make sure that we identified students in a timely manner to get early intervention in place as soon as possible. Historically, the last time I was here, we talked about Easy IEP and Ed Plan implementation. Last year was our full implementation for all schools to be able to implement the new IEP system. We did have a few bugs, as we typically would implementing a brand new system. Fortunately, all of those bugs have been taken care of, and we are up and running smoothly this year. Provides us a great opportunity to be able to better inform IEP teams with current data and assessments, but also to make sure that our teams aren't focused on compliance. They're focused more on programming, present levels of performance, and the specific needs of students. Those boxes on the IEP, if they're not checked or a decision hasn't been made when it should have been made, the system will be able to inform the team that they need to go back and consider whatever is required in order to finalize that process. Our biggest task this year is the new legislative changes, which we'll be discussing, or I'll be presenting on for the remainder of the presentation, as they're the greatest impact to ESE programming for this school year. One's around access points and FSAA. Another is House Bill 173, which is transition services. So we're now considering transition services and transition IEPs at the age of 12 years old rather than 14 years old. And also House Bill 149 in relation to restraint, and we'll get into that a little further as we get into the presentation. Based on statute, school districts in schools have to do a BPI self-assessment, which is the best practices for inclusive education. Last school year, the district successfully completed our BPI process. This year, it's up to each individual school to go through that self-assessment and upload it into the state database in order to comply with statute. It is a great way to be able to self-assess the climate and culture around inclusion for specific schools or for all schools. Okay, so this is getting into the first legislative change. The FLDOE, the Department of Education, defined inclusionary and exclusionary factors to consider making a student eligible for access points instruction in Florida Standards Alternative Assessment, which is known to us as FSAA. So within that law that was passed June 10th, right before we started this year, they established the definition of most significant cognitive disability. With that identification, students would be able to become eligible for being instructed on access points, but also taking the FSAA. One thing we did down the bottom of the slide is created a course for all staff, administrators, coordinators, school-based team, contacts, teachers, school psychologists, and other stakeholders to be able to make sure all are well informed with this new statute and make sure that we're following the new legislation that's been signed. So just to get into that a little deeper, most significant cognitive disability is further defined. In this specifically, one biggest point for us is historically, in order to be considered for access points or to have an intellectual disability, you would need to have an IQ below 70. They are now saying that you would need to have it at 67 or under. So they're further defining the global cognitive score for the evaluations done that measure a student's IQ. The second one that is a large impact is to, because we have students who are nonverbal, who do not respond. So districts need to apply for a process to be able to measure a child's global full-scale intelligence when that assessment that would typically be given by a school psychologist, where that IQ is unattainable. So we have worked with our school psychologists, our program support staff, our instructional staff to confirm a process. It has been submitted to the state, and we're anticipating feedback soon. So the inclusionary and exclusionary criteria for consideration of FSAA and access points. In this specific designation, we are encouraging all schools to be able to review all students that are currently on access points. So that wouldn't be a formal IEP meeting. It would be the ESE contact, the school psychologist, an ESE resource teacher, and any other stakeholder who knows the child at the school to review the file and review all the inclusionary and exclusionary criteria that has been established by the state to see if the child would still meet eligibility for access points and FSAA. What we did was created a Google survey. So the school staff would click into a link and they would go through all 11 criteria, answer the questions accordingly, and determine whether that child still meets or does no longer meet criteria for Florida Standards Alternative Assessment or access points. If the child does not, or there is question that the child would, then we're highly encouraging teams to go through the reevaluation process to obtain current data before making that decision. One of the inclusionary, or I should say exclusionary criteria is if there is a student who had ever scored a level 2 on the FSA, they would no longer be eligible to be able to take the alternative assessment. Okay, and students we know should not be enrolled in access courses without going through this process in the future. So at this time, the state has taken away all courses in kindergarten for access points. The reason why is because they're requiring that all students have at least a year in gen ed courses with intensive intervention before even being considered for access points or FSAA. We just recently got updated data on the third bullet down where it says grades 1 and 2 access courses are daggered. The state didn't formally come out and tell us that they are no longer daggered, but when you go into CPOMs, which is where they provide all the course descriptions, they changed that designation from daggered to now being available. So based on that, we're suspecting that grades 1 and 2 access points courses will remain in place. But at this time, there are no access point standards for the best standards, Florida best standards, for grades 1 and 2. They say they'll be available to us in the year 22-23. So we'll be anticipating that and using the old standards to be able to instruct students on access points until the new standards are defined.
Sorry to interrupt, but what does it mean to be daggered?
Daggered means will no longer be available. So they're still available, but in the future, like for next year, if they were still daggered, we would not be able to utilize that course for next year. So in CPOMs, which is the state description of their courses, if a course is labeled daggered, it means we can still use it for this year, but next year it'll no longer be available. It will be discontinued.
So there will be no access point courses for kindergarten, first and second grade?
So for kindergarten, there will be no access points any longer. For first and second grade, they just took the daggered designation off of those courses in CPOMs. So based on that, and this is just recent, obviously, so recent that I haven't updated the slide yet, but you're getting it hot off the press. We anticipate grades 1 and 2 access points will still be available for students who make all the inclusionary and exclusionary criteria to be able to be eligible for access points or FSAA.
So the students who would normally be needing access points in kindergarten, what will be happening for those students?
So they're no longer eligible for access points instruction according to Florida statute. So they'll be having to take kindergarten general education classes. Now, I want to be specific here. This is only focused on the standards taught. It does not impact the classroom that they're in. The classroom that they're in is defined as their least restrictive environment. So they could still, let's say we're talking about a child with autism in a classroom that teaches self-contained classes that teaches students with autism. If they're in kindergarten, they still have access to that setting, but their core curriculum, according to the state of Florida, is still required to be general education standards, not access point standards.
Thank you.
Just to shift a little bit, this is House Bill 149, specifically focused on restraints and restraints for students with disabilities. We have an existing policy, 5.181, that covers the majority of everything that's in this statute. The only, and the most important piece, I should say, is the use of positive behavior interventions prior to the use of restraint, and to only use restraint as a last resort. That is currently in our processes. We've been doing this work for many years, really trying to focus on positive behavior supports, prevention and de-escalation prior to considering the use of restraint to maintain safety of the student and the others in that setting. The specific addition to this legislation that this legislation has impacted our current policy requires all staff trained in restraint procedures to be also CPR trained. Also requires a crisis intervention plan, which has already been finalized for any student who's been restrained twice during a semester, which is an 18-week period. The statute also requires education and training for students with, or teaching students with emotional behavioral disabilities. That is currently, we're updating this policy now. We're going through the process. And if you follow the board meetings as I do, you'll be seeing this policy workshop come probably in the month of November. All right, this is our last slide. Best practice for inclusive education. This is information for you to better understand the process and what our schools will be doing as they go through this self-assessment process and determine how they can improve inclusive practices on their school campuses. As they go through this process, they'll set goals for themselves and be able to have action steps to try to achieve those goals. That's it for me. Do we have any questions?
Charmaine?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. So my question is, so I so your hand will be lowered. Okay. Sorry about that. I'm reading what's popping up on my screen. So my question is, I've been around this talk, so I understand this talk. But as I sit here and I have an adult that's in my background, my partner, he's like completely confused. So that brought me to that question. He's like, what are they talking about? Which brought me to the question, like, how are we communicating where parents can understand this? And, or is this even, have this been communicated to parents in their language?
Very good question. The issue, so to quickly respond, the best way to address this with parents is one at a time. In an IEP meeting with staff who know the child and who the parent is familiar with. The challenge we have with this new legislation is there is no written guidance out from the state. All we have is the statute to follow at this point. In advocating for written guidance, the only piece we were able to get solidified was a chart of the specific inclusionary and exclusionary criteria that students are required to meet in order to remain eligible for access points in Florida Standards Alternative Assessment. So we have been very focused on training ESE contacts, training our teachers, and at this point, it's easy to walk back or change the message, or I should say easier, doing it with staff because they understand the state dynamic. It's much more difficult to do that with parents. So a great example would be if we got ahead of ourselves and told parents and who have children in the first and second grade that those standards would no longer be available to them, that would be very confusing for a parent. We waited on it because we wanted to see it in writing, and before we knew it, the guidance changed. So we're trying to move fast in educating our staff, but move slow enough to wait for the state to give us guidance in writing before we formally put something out to all parents, especially parents of students that this would impact.
Thank you very much. Randy, I believe is the next question.
Let me go off my mute. I have a question, a general question. Normally, would these changes in rules be through the Department of Education, or is it the Red Book rules? Can't remember.
Yes.
As opposed to a House bill. And I don't know if that's the normal procedure for this.
So typically, and what I think you're asking is why did they do this, or how did they do this? So the federal government, when ESSA passed, Every Student Succeeds Act, defined or gave specific guidance to states who use the alternative assessment to designate it only for students with most significant cognitive disability. In other words, not every student with an intellectual disability should qualify for access points, modified instruction, or taking the alternative assessment. At that time, they set a 1% cap of all students in every state, and the state set a 1% cap for districts to, so that 1% would be the total amount of students who are eligible for access points instruction and Florida Standards Alternative Assessment. The state historically has been over that 1%. Locally here in Palm Beach, we've been over that 1%. And if you ask me, legislation moved on this because things were not improving. Things were going in the wrong direction, and legislation took action.
But had it gone through a rule, it would have been open for public comment. Correct?
That's correct, yes.
And I think that may be one of the reasons. I agree with you that we probably use it more than we need to. But on the other side of the coin, I also think that a student doesn't necessarily have to have a 67 IQ to be incapable of taking the FSAs. So, you know, there's other factors that play into this, but
I agree.
I understand this is what we have and this is what we have to do. I appreciate it. Thank you for coming back tonight after spending last month with us. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
My pleasure. And just so you know, it's that 67 IQ is only one of the 11 inclusionary criteria. So they need to meet all in order to be eligible for FSA and access points.
So if they meet 10 of those criteria but have an IQ of 68 or 69, then they're not eligible for access points?
Yes, at this point, based on what the statute says, that is true. So typically when it's that close, and any diagnostician will tell you that, you know, it might be a good opportunity to reevaluate, make sure we have updated data before making that drastic decision with, you know, data that may be over 3 years old. So that's the guidance we've given our teams to be able to, if there's any doubt in a scenario like that, to gather more information before making a decision.
Okay, thank you. Randy, do you have any other questions? Your hand is still up.
Yeah. No, I just, the other thing I wanted to ask, if you're in middle school and you've taken access points through FSA, and you've got an IQ of 69, you are no longer, it is no longer available to you?
So in that scenario, we are really encouraging our middle schools to focus on their 8th graders first, to be able to, in that scenario, do a reevaluation, get updated information, and hopefully be able to make a more informed decision prior to that student moving on to high school when they start earning credits, because that's going to be a challenge for students who were on an alternative track for graduation and now need to switch tracks based on the new law.
That's my concern. That's my main concern in this new legislation, is that the effect it's going to have on students that have never, ever, you know, taken the FSA without access points, and all of a sudden they're thrown into it.
And Palm Beach is unique to other districts in the entire state because we have many charter schools that are all ESE specifically for students on access points. So this is directly impacting those schools. And they're having a tough time with this new legislation for obvious reasons. You know, we truly believe we're doing what's best for kids when we make decisions at an IEP team. And now they're being asked to reconsider those based on the criteria provided by FLDOE.
And I would imagine there's no parent input into this, you know, that can change the outcome of the required IQ.
Not at this time.
That's what I thought. Thank you very much.
Cheryl, I believe you're next.
Thanks, it's Sherelle.
Cheryl, sorry.
So, Mark, I understand where you're coming from. I understand the you know, how things work and how things are operating going forward. However, Um, my biggest concern is like what Charmaine said, is the parent. When you guys consider this program or knew it was coming down the line, we didn't at all. Did you at all notify any parents that this could happen? Because these parents already have struggles. This just isn't one struggle that they have. They have other struggles because this child is incapable of functioning in a regular, a regular way. So they have day-to-day issues that they have. And as a parent, I don't think that you guys even considered alerting us, telling us that this is coming down the line. You said it yourself that you guys felt you would wait to notify a parent, and that's not fair to that parent, because that parent, especially with a child with disability, is already struggling 24 hours 7 days a week. And when you deliver this, and I've been in those IEP conversations, and those IEP courses, and not courses, but conversations may not be clear. And that parent, only reason why I knew is that I did my history, I did my background, I researched what my challenge was for my son. But that parent may not do that. So when you're sitting there and you're considering this, you haven't considered that parent at all. So now this parent has to make, in the 8th grade, decide whether or not my child goes to high school, and he may not graduate, and he'll have to take the FSA and all of that. And where we have, I think that, and I'm not saying you personally, please excuse me.
I understand.
But when we start considering things like this, we should have notified the parent potentially that this was happening. So now I know, I directly know parents that have kids in not middle school, but in the 4th and 5th grade, that's directly going to be affected by that. And they're struggling just with trying to wrap their head around that my child has a regular child. And it's almost like you took that away, not you, but this takes that away from them, not even having them to prepare, because literally, if they start preparing in the 8th grade, that's not long enough for them. They need to start preparing earlier. So now it's too late, but you did what you had to do. But going forward, I would certainly, as a parent, I would at least would like to be highlighted that this may happen.
So
And only feedback.
Thank you, Sherelle. I just wanted to point out on this slide, we had no idea this was coming. This came June 10th through legislative action. And then, this isn't going to impact all students on access points. So to put it out broad to the entire district and have parents who are already stressed and concerned based on the reality of the world we're living in today, start to panic over something that may not impact them at all.
Why panic? Why use the word panic?
So
because my son directly, if I had not, I have a cousin, a relative who's directly going to be affected by this. And we don't panic. They aren't panicking. What they're doing is preparing and trying to wrap their head around it.
So it may not impact them. That was my point. This may change their track.
Based off of the 11 rules that you put here, it is directly going to affect him.
Okay.
It is.
Okay.
So these conversations will happen one at a time, and we're reviewing all files as we speak. We're asking for all files to be reviewed as soon as possible. And as soon as there is any question that a child may not meet the criteria, an IEP meeting is scheduled to have that conversation with the parent. So they're including in the process of whatever decisions need to be made based on this change in statute. This is not something that happens overnight. This is something that we're going to follow a strategic system and process to make sure only those parents that are being impacted or students who are being impacted are engaged with this conversation.
Just as a follow-up. What happens to the student who is being reevaluated in this process? If they are currently in access points and they're being reevaluated
They
because,
remain in their current program. So
okay,
the only, from a district perspective, we are assessed by the state. We go through a self-assessment monitoring. So the state will pull 20 random students from first grade through 12th grade and audit their files. So if we're in a situation where we're in a reevaluation, we would be considered to be compliant with that audit because we're gaining more information. If nothing has been done, we would have findings and then have, of course, corrective action, of which we had last year. Prior to the even being statute out to define this, the criteria they gave us is not the current criteria we're working under. Things are constantly changing from the state coming to the district. Hugely frustrating, especially when you're talking about children and families. I share your frustration with those of you on the call expressing that right now.
I just have another question. So with with all of this, is the district prepared to add ESE teachers? And I mean, because it seems as if you're going to need to add a bit more. Is the district prepared, or can they afford to add these teachers and psychologists and therapists and for this?
So the current staff are going through the process of these reviews. If in the future it changes how kids are programmed for, of course, our district is more than prepared to be able to service our students. The finding staff who are licensed and certified is a whole different story based on, Dr. Sheffield's comments earlier, especially in the field of speech and language pathology. We're critical shortage. So to answer your question, yes, our finance department has always been supportive, based on my experience in this position, in making sure that schools are allocated to meet the needs of our kids.
Basically, it's like nothing we can do, right? We just have to deal with it.
It's Florida law. So that's why I'm presenting it here, because it's what our reality is now that
Yeah.
our legislature has done what they've done.
All right. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
okay, so we have another person, but I'm not sure who it is, but it's Ma'at Learning Exchange, I'm assuming.
It's Myra. Hi.
Myra, thank you.
So I, at the risk of beating a dead horse, I was an ESC coordinator for some time, and so that we don't panic parents, or because we think that parents would be confused by information, is not sufficient to not tell parents. That's first and foremost. I won't dig into the weeds on this because there's an awful lot, and I'd like to take time to go over it and then respond independently. But I'm very concerned, as Chanel and Charmaine said very well. Parents must be told. If this came out on June 10th, there should have been town halls or something planned so that parents can know what's happening with their children. It is confusing enough for those who are familiar with education, let alone for parents who are petrified that they're not doing the right things for their children to support their children. I think it's very important. My only question would be to how the department intends to connect with the new Office of Equity. I'm hearing all of this, and one of the major problems here is that particularly Black students are overrepresented in ESE and are not receiving the services necessarily that they need to be successful. And so within all of this, I'd like to know what that process will look like. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for the question. I do have staff over professional development within my department who works directly with the equity department and the manager in equity to be able to coordinate our trainings, to be able to support each other in training, but also I've asked for all of my staff to make sure they go through training in equity. And we're addressing that as we go, based on the information that we receive and the collaboration we have with that specific department. In relation to overrepresentation of Black students in ESE programs, I agree. The statistics and the numbers are concerning. What we're doing is making sure we're focusing on prevention, school-based teams, multi-tiered systems of support, making sure quality supports and services are in place early to be able to address it and to provide more supports prior to making kids eligible. That's an ongoing struggle to be able to get school-based teams functioning in the way that we expect them to. And it's something that we are constantly focused on in looking to improve. We have lots of resources out there now for evidence-based and research-based practices, strategies, interventions for both academics and behavior to support the problem-solving process. As you know, monitoring data and having that data inform us with interventions that are implemented with fidelity are key to making sure we're not overrepresenting any group or over-identifying any student for a disability.
So to follow up on that question, with this push towards better coordination and more informed research-based and evidence-based practices in terms of implementation, have you noticed any changes in the numbers?
For the schools that we know are doing it with fidelity, yes.
Were you talking about changes in numbers in terms of representation? Because if that's the case, then the answer isn't yes, right?
For the schools that we know are implementing intervention with fidelity for behavior.
Interventions in order to diminish the overrepresentation. Yeah, those numbers haven't changed. Those numbers are exactly the same.
District-wide, yes.
Yeah. Yes.
But for the schools that are implementing it, you're saying that there have been changes.
Yes.
There are no specific strategies in this district at present to diminish, unless I'm mistaken, Kevin, to diminish the overrepresentation. There are no specific strategies, correct?
The specific strategies is what I stated, in making sure we're using the problem-solving process and evidence-based, research-based interventions.
Yeah,
to
those
be
are
able
not.
to,
Yeah, I'm talking about specific to equity in terms of strategic plan equity. Those strategies, not numbers and how many do we have and we're rolling out the problem solving. I'm talking about specific to equitable outcomes for Black students and Brown students.
Yeah.
And if we do have that, then I've missed it, and I would happily apologize. I would love to see that structured.
No,
I would love to see that.
I'd be happy to discuss it further. Really, my perspective is that we focus on quality service for students, which will improve outcomes for students, both Black and Brown, to be able to make sure they're getting their needs met, and we're providing the right level of support for each kid.
So wait, but Kevin, are in those 20 random kids that you're gonna pick randomly, right?
The state picks them, yes.
Right, the state's gonna pick them randomly. How will we know if Black and Brown are gonna be affected by them to do the trial run?
We don't, which is why we focus on all kids to make sure all kids go through this review process.
And that would work. I'm sorry. That would work ideally if this was an equitable playing field. If you have an overrepresentation of any group, then that throws that completely off. You can't say, oh, we're going to do it the ideal way if we're not existing in an ideal world.
You can't just say we're going to treat everybody because everybody needs it. If some kids are falling through the cracks, I'm a mother. If one child needs something specific, I would give that to that child. The other three might need something else.
I agree.
And that's what ESC is about. And I'm hoping that we'll really be able to have honest conversations about this and not pretend that we're doing better. Our children are at stake here.
And also, I mean, when we start looking at this, what are we taking away? What type of programs are being eliminated to help not just Black and brown students and the parents, now that this comes out?
So we're
What
not eliminating any
gonna be
programs.
removed?
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry?
I said we're not eliminating any programs. If anything, we're focusing more on providing academic supports that in intervention, specifically research-based intervention, that's going to support functional skills for students who are designated as most significantly cognitively disabled.
Okay. So this training, the training that's going on now, right? It started already, correct?
So the training is the training is only the process that's been given to us by the state. And on the slide right here, the state requires us to review all students, which is the process we're going through right now, to determine if, based on the file review, they meet the inclusionary and exclusionary criteria. That the training I referenced is specifically for the coordinators to be able to follow the process with their team at their school.
Yeah.
And that training has been updated twice based on the information we receive from the state.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Randy, I see that your hand's raised.
Again, yes, again. I just want to say that I was involved. I had firsthand knowledge of some of the changes that came down since the June 20th original memo. And I can tell you that I saw changes happen over a telephone call. And so I think, you know, in that sense, the district was leery to put something out only because everything was changing so quickly. I know, Kevin, you were probably involved in some of that where, you know, changes came down, you know, unannounced instantly for the FSA.
Yes, and we've done 2 trainings specifically for our ESE advisory and provided updates every month when we meet to be able to make sure our community and stakeholders are informed as we receive information.
Thank you. I know, like I said, I've been involved in several of the conversations, firsthand knowledge with the Department of Education, and I know it's changed very quickly and on very short notice.
And they don't put much in writing, which is our biggest challenge.
Yes, I got that too. Thank you.
But we always pivot, right? Whenever that change happens, like you said, the change came overnight or over a phone call. It wasn't, I get phone calls overnight. I mean, I got a phone call that the bus was running late because the rain was there. So you couldn't tell me that you couldn't just notify a parent in the morning, or, I mean, just highlight, please check this area because some changes may be coming that affect your child. You have the data of the children that might be affected. So you couldn't notify those parents.
Ma'am,
I mean,
we don't. We're going through the review process now to determine if we have the data that's going. We don't know which kids this is going to impact until we do these reviews.
What is your office's policy or plan for disseminating information to parents? Short-term information that comes quickly, and then information that you have over time. What is the policy? How do you disseminate that information to parents at this point?
So in multiple ways, we have Parent University, which we provide trainings to parents monthly. They have access at those trainings to myself and my administrative staff to be able to answer any questions and to be able to provide them information. We provide continuous information to ESE Advisory. We always provide updates and information to schools, ESE contacts, and teachers who are our staff who have relationships with our parents of students with disabilities. So we are constantly providing updated information in multiple ways to be able to make sure that the parents who need the information get the information based on the program that their students are in.
Thank you very much. In light of time and seeing no other hands raised, if we could, I really appreciate you taking the time to come back and be with us again and give us this information. And I'm sure that we would love to hear an update as to how those trainings have impacted the numbers of overrepresentation overall, so we can continue to take a look at that. If we can move forward in our agenda to the Masterboard analysis, that would be wonderful.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. Good evening, y'all. Am I echoing? Bear with us a second.
It's a very faint echo, so if you want to keep going.
Okay, so excuse me. I'd like to thank you all for your time this evening. This should be pretty quick in terms of presentation. We can have some discussion. We're trying to get the slide deck to present correctly at the moment. You're not sharing again.
Laura, while we're waiting for that, can I just ask that at the next meeting, we have an update of what have been agreed on with staff on how we would communicate, the previous conversation? Can we have an update, like how many students, or at minimum, if the students have been identified? I would like to propose an update from Mr. McCormick, if possible, at the next meeting.
Do we have to vote on that? Because if so, I would second it.
Indeed, yeah.
Well, if you want to make a motion, then to include that would be great, and then we would have a second.
Okay, I would like to make a motion for Mr. McCormick to return back here at the next meeting to give us an update of where exactly we are with the access point communication to the parents.
I second that.
To say he's available.
Any discussion?
I just think that it's necessary.
All in favor?
Laura?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hey, Laura?
Yes.
I was saying, when you called for the discussion, I was trying to get your attention that
Sorry.
you will have to say, the availability to see if Mr. McCormick is available.
Understood.
Yes, I just want to make that clear.
Whenever he is available or through staff, if he can have that update through staff. He may not necessarily be, but I'm just asking for someone to bring it back to this body as an update. It does not necessarily have to be Mr. McCormick. For clarification.
Do we need to do a motion to update that?
I bring forth a motion to, or I recall the motion and bring a motion or update to say that at the next meeting to have an update of the access point presentation on exactly where we are with the access point and communicating with parents.
App available, right? I second that.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
So we're ready to move on? Okay.
Yes, please.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate y'all's time this evening. My name is Paul Houchins. I'm the Director of Research and Evaluation. Dr. Sheffield asked me to come in today to kind of talk through our Masterboard analysis process that goes on with our schools, primarily our middle and high schools. We're working to bring some of this into the elementary level as well. We look at it as a continuous improvement process, the scheduling process being a cycle, an annual cycle where each of our schools should be getting better year over year over year as they progress through and get more into the details and more precise in their attempts to schedule students. So I'll go through kind of some of the data we've seen over the last few years and this year, and then I'll close out with the process that has been going on and how we've refined it over the last, call it 4 or 5 years. And then we'll move into questions or conversations. So the district's vision and mission, I'm sure you've all read it. I've highlighted the key pieces here that are tied to this process, around kind of reducing any biases students might experience, particularly in the scheduling process. Really, as a district and schools specifically, taking ownership of students' academic mastery and their ability to experience a rigorous and robust accelerated education. And then kind of that joy of learning, fostering that in each student. That's kind of tied to that thought of rigor and challenge being kind of that root of enjoyment, and that high expectations making students feel more involved in their own learning is just going back to the mission of the district, trying to embed equity into the systems that we're processing as a district. So this work isn't just starting. This work, those are both our new vision and mission, but this work started long ago. The most recent kind of cycle in which this rolled out was in our recently sunset strategic plan, where the fourth long-term outcome was fostering postgraduate success, which was really measured by student achievement as they graduated in courses that identify readiness for some post-secondary outcome. As you can see from the slide, the district made progress, incremental progress over the span of the plan, closed some gaps, but in general just showed improvements across subgroups and overall. So while we by no means think we're done and that this is the end stage, it does recognize some success in the process as we've gone in it through from the 2015 school year through current. Looking into student identification.
Sorry, if we can go back to that slide. I just think if we wait, we'll forget the questions.
Certainly, we can.
So first question is, what is the 73 in red? And when we're looking at the difference between FY19 and FY20, when we're saying the percent of graduate successful outcomes, what does that mean specifically? Meaning that they went on to, they finished these courses, or that they passed the exams, or what is it?
Certainly. So the red 73 was the target for the 2020 school year. We were close. Obviously, we weren't at 73. We hit 72. And this is, again, the long-term outcome from the strategic plan, which was measured by students graduating from high school with at least one successful outcome in an AP, IB, Cambridge, dual enrollment, or industry certification course. Passing the test with the exception of dual enrollment. So if I took an AP course, did I pass the test? Dual enrollment, it's measured slightly differently. It's measured by getting a C or better in the course because there is no test at the end of a dual enrollment course like there is at the end of an AP, IB, or ACE course.
Okay, and I see two hands raised. Dr. Sheffield?
No, I'm okay, Laura. I was just going to say we may want to go through the slides and then allow for questions because we do have a stop at 7:15. We have quite a few slides.
Okay.
Do we want to address that other hand before we move on?
No, that's okay. We can go through the slides.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So moving into our manners for identifying students, one of the primary ways we have to identify students for potential success in an AP or an ACE course, IB course. You may know we give the PSAT to students in grades 8, 9, and 10. That generates a data point that we get back from the College Board called AP Potential that we should be using to enroll students in these upper level courses. They indicate, those values indicate, Paul may be successful in an AP psychology, to identify those students. It's not the only data point we use, but it's one of the ones we have quite a bit of data on because of the students taking the tests, the PSAT in 8, 9, and 10. We also encourage schools to use GPA. We have several reports in EDW to help kind of guide schools in the scheduling of students in these higher rigor courses. As you can see from the data over the last 3 years, we're using quite a bit. We're using AP Potential quite a bit. Obviously, 22 is a little lower than it had been in the prior 2 years. That may be due to several issues that were going on last year in terms of access to students because of the different learning modes. But as you can see, it's pretty high across the board with a couple of exceptions. And now I'm not clicking. Okay, good. So one of the key pieces to the whole Masterboard process is that the enrollment in accelerated coursework can't start in high school. It can't be, students are not exposed to any level of rigor, and then all of a sudden in 9th grade, okay, you're going to take all AP courses along those lines. So what we started doing several years ago in terms of the Masterboard process, we started it in the high schools. The first year, we were exclusively in high schools. And in the second year, we rolled middle schools into the process and looking at students who were enrolled in advanced coursework in middle school or high school coursework in middle school to determine, kind of that front loading of access to rigor. One of the impetuses for this addition was, some anecdotal data on students who had no exposure to acceleration in high school. And when we went back and looked at what their schedules looked like in middle school, they were in all regular coursework in middle school. So that lack of exposure early was just kind of continuing. It informed us to go back and actually push for middle school as well. So as you can see here, there's been a couple of hiccups. Last couple of years have been a little weird across the board, so things have gone up and down in some instances. But overall, from 2018 to 2022, we've generally increased enrollment and access for middle school students to advanced level coursework. This would be in advanced math, this would be algebra, could be just advanced social studies in the middle school, just any level of, because not all students are math students. They may not want to go acceleration in math, but may be really interested in social studies. So any level of rigor exposure in the middle school level is used as part of this process. So that was the trend data showing we've kind of, again, generally gone upward. Definitely want to make larger strides than we have, but we're working at this as a continuous improvement process. So this is a picture of our Masterboard Dashboard that we use, that our principal supervisors use with schools, that we use centrally for conversations around this exposure and this access. And to level set you to what we're looking at here, Essentially speaking, on the right-hand side, you're talking about access. What proportion of students are receiving access to this type of coursework? So for example, in 2022, 79% of white students were enrolled in at least one middle school advanced coursework, up about 3.5 percentage points from 2021. For Black students, about 64% were enrolled in at least one advanced course in middle school, up from 54%. So, a larger increase in gap closure. And the access side, Hispanic students were, up a little less than 5 percentage points year over year. So the right-hand side is the access piece. So what proportion of students are receiving access to some level of advanced coursework? In an ideal world, all of those bars would be approaching 100 or be at 100. So that's, again, students getting access. The left-hand side is what is the representation of that access. So what is the equity of that access? So really the way we use this tool, right-hand side we consider to be access, left-hand side we consider to be equity. So the gray bars on the left-hand side represent the district's middle school enrollment by race. So in 2021, approximately 27.5% of our 6th through 8th grade students were Black. 2022, it dropped a little bit, it's 27%. Hispanic is 37 and 36.5. So you can see the gray bars represent the district overall. The blue bars represent the district, in this case, in a middle school advanced coursework. So in 2021, 23.3% of our Black students in middle school were enrolled in some kind of advanced course. And in 2022, this current school year, that's up to 24.8. So you can see, yes, the Black students are still underrepresented based on their district enrollment, but they did improve. It went from, the gap got lower, the gap from equity got lower by 2 percentage points. You can see there in red, the Hispanics slipped a little bit, but it's essentially right there around no real change considering it's 0.5 percentage point. And then the white students, that's green, it's a 1.4, but you can see the bars actually got a little bit closer. So ideally speaking, on the left-hand side, the gray bar and the blue bars would be equal. If the gray bar and the blue bar were equal for each of those racial groups, it would mean that their representation in whatever coursework we're looking at, in this case, advanced middle school coursework, is equal to their district representation. There's no gap between where they are in terms of the enrollment in the district and where they are in terms of enrollment in that particular course that we're looking at. And while we're looking at middle school advanced overall here, in the actual tool we use with the schools, we can drill in and look at math by itself. We can look at social studies by itself. We can look at a lot of different things individually, but this is kind of for the large-scale process, the large-scale conversation, kind of the core of what we're looking at. So moving into high school, students who enrolled in a college level coursework. This is advanced placement, Cambridge, International Baccalaureate, dual enrollment. You can see a similar trend to what we saw in the middle school, generally improving, some gap closures we've seen over the last 5 years. Black students went from 24.5% of the students enrolled in one of those types of course up to 37%. So again, incremental improvements. We'd like to see more over time, and we're kind of building some things into the process as we move forward that should help that. Same basic chart as middle school, but instead of looking at middle school, we're looking at, again, high school students and college level coursework. On the right-hand side, you can see this year, 37% of Black students, a little less than 50% of Hispanic students, and right at 63% of white students are enrolled in at least one of a college level course. And you can see what the increase is over time. So again, more and more access over time, because these bars, we look at this as a 2-year piece, but we have this going back 5 years, looking at the trend over time. Then flipping to the left-hand side, again, you can see, generally speaking, about a 2-point improvement in that representation for our Black students, about even, a little bit on the positive side of even for Hispanic students, and again, the white students moving closer to representation, which is again the goal for this particular, the left-hand side of this report. So that was the data, what we've been looking at. Obviously performance is another big point of this that we look at over time as well, but really the Masterboard part of the process is around equity or access and equity of access. And to accomplish that, we've built this continuous improvement cycle that's displayed on the screen, where we basically have conversations going on with schools year-round between principals, supervisors, curriculum, teaching and learning staff, research staff, providing data to guide instruction or guide conversations around how the schools are doing their master boards. So that first phase, that August to December phase, is really a review of the process. Where did we end up? Did we hit our goals for a particular school? The schools have an internal conversation around developing their course guide, really understanding why they offer some of the courses they offer. When we first implemented this part of the process, this phase of the process, there were a lot of conversations around courses that were being offered that were such legacy courses that no one currently involved in the scheduling process was 100% clear on why those courses were being offered. They were able to dig in and find out the history and why, but the people who were actively in the process at the moment, just didn't have that information off the top of their head. So they got to actually think critically and be very intentional in how they built their course process and their course guides. During this phase, they work with the FTE team, the central IT part of the office that works through the technical setup around, around the actual entering of the process. And starting in January, that bottom right-hand side, that gray arrow, the schools distribute their course requests. They counsel students, to make rigorous requests. They distribute and collect the course selection sheets, and they enter those requests into the student information system. And so at the start of that process, we provide them, the schools, with the data we just showed from the Masterboard Dashboard to allow them to have a conversation with their principal supervisor. What did I look like last year? What do I look like this year? And how can I improve next year? What do I need? Do I need more training? Do I need more teachers that are, trained and qualified in whatever course we might want to try to add? So through January through March, they work on the collection process and kind of a triage of where they are. Then from April to June, it's the actual request process where course requests are being input into the student information system. We're providing course request-based enrollment numbers so the schools can, determine where they need to, triage and get to target more students to get into courseworks. As they build their master schedule and finalize it towards that June window in the upper left-hand corner, that's when they start actually finalizing schedules. We provide data through that window as well. Instead of being based on requests, it's based on the actual scheduling. And then as we loop back around into the red in the August-December range, we continue to provide data at the start of the school year, at the 11-day count. We'll provide it at the end of the fourth quarter to identify schools where students might be getting enrolled but falling out of those courses. Because we all know that sometimes kids will get in and then after the first quarter they'll want out, or they'll need support of some kind or another to be successful. So we've really worked to turn this into, instead of the Masterboard process being an annual process, it's really a continuous cycle year over year with the intent of, making historically speaking, over the last 5 years, incremental improvements. And hopefully, as we kind of accelerate the process and build it more cyclically, more large-scale improvements in access and equity over time. With that, I will turn it back to the group for questions.
Thank you. I can't see your face, but I see your physical hand being raised. So you're listed. I think you're muted.
Hi. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was very interesting. I had several questions. So my first question is, what I noticed in the data was that we did it by race, but we did not look at ESC students. When I saw in the beginning that they had the lowest amount of higher level coursework. And to me, that needs to be tracked because so many ESC students with can handle these classes, and we're not providing them in the classes. Some of the classes I've heard from people that they're not getting the right accommodation, so therefore they can't take it, or they can't provide sports facilitation, so they can't take a higher level class. Secondly, another question is I think this Masterboard scheduling has to even go back to elementary school, because I know children that are ESE children that miss their science class because that's when their ESC service is. But these kids might be very gifted or talented in science, but are missing out. Therefore, we'll have to track in a regular science class. So how, I'm curious your thoughts on my questions and how we can address them.
Well, I do want to say to you that what you're seeing tonight, you're seeing the secondary phase of this. And we are working, just like we're working on fine tuning. Nothing is never perfect for secondary, but it's definitely a step in the right direction. We are also doing and working on this process for elementary. So as the principal supervisors and the district team that we have here continue to work on, to your point, a similar process around elementary at a later time, we'll be more than happy to come back and share with you what the elementary piece will look like.
I think that's very important.
Okay,
But what about the data tracking for the middle and high school level? And how do we give these ESE children that have, a good IQ, that can do, these rigorous courses with accommodations or with support facilitation? How are we addressing that? Because our numbers are the lowest when it comes to ESE. And I also noticed the English as second language was also very low, and those kids should not be excluded as well. So how are we handling that? What is our plan to fix that?
So this data here represents exclusively just students with AP potential, not all students. So this isn't that necessarily ELL students or SWD students have less access. It's just that one particular flag is not necessarily what's driving them in. So just to clarify this piece. In terms of the ESE and other subgroup data, this is just kind of a screen capture of the tool. The tool actually also allows and has filters so we can look at ESE and ELL and free and reduced lunch also. It's just, again, there's a lot of data, so chose not to bring it to today, but it is part of the conversation in the Masterboard process and part of this dashboard tool that allows for drilling based on ESE, ELL, and FRL as well.
Is that something that could be brought back to us?
Certainly.
Okay. And I think there are some other questions regarding ESC, but before I ask them, Dr. Diaz, you're up.
Thank you. The data shows discrepancy between Black, white, and Hispanic students in advanced level courses, and that's not surprising because that's found all over the country. However, the source of the data is the district's own computers, if you will, who takes what course, et cetera. What the data doesn't tell us is why there are discrepancies. If we assume that students have equal amounts of ability across ethnic backgrounds, why is it that we have significant discrepancies in those who are willing to take advanced level courses? So for example, I'd just like to raise the question, how much data do we generate from students themselves? Such as, is there classroom or school climate data available? This could greatly affect the student's willingness to take advanced level courses. Second, is there a correlation between schools with more positive climates, especially for Black and Latino students, and their participation in advanced courses? And is the converse true? In those schools that have less positive environments for students of color, is there a lower participation in advanced level courses? So I know I've asked a lot, but I particularly would like to know if we gather any data from students themselves regarding school and classroom climate and what we do with that.
So in terms of let me take this kind of in two pieces. In terms of how we address that particular conversation, currently that's addressed more in the process piece, the conversation and the interaction between the principal supervisor and the scheduling team at the school in terms of what might be necessary to drive improvements in close gaps in terms of access. I know a lot of schools, that conversation ends up revolving around AVID and the availability of support infrastructures in the schedule. But as a data point towards this particular process right now, as I said, that's really the discussion at the school level and not really in the core set of data. In terms of climate, we do, with the exception of last year, annually do a climate survey of the school. It was suspended last year due to all of the different things going on with COVID and different instructional modes. It was just decided to suspend it for a year, but we will be bringing it back this year. Historically speaking, though, that survey has been anonymous, and so can't really tie it to a student's ethnicity or racial background, but it definitely is an interesting question that we can potentially take a look at in terms of overall climate at the school and participation and enrollment. But currently, based on the data, the way we've collected it, historically speaking, there's not a drill down in to look at the difference between the subgroups on that front.
Do students take the climate survey or just the parents?
Students, parents, and teachers.
What about classroom climate?
I apologize. Can you repeat that?
I said, what about classroom climate?
Some of the items are specific to the classroom that are on that survey, but it is generally a school level climate survey.
So we don't know whether classroom A or classroom B is more affirming to any category of student.
Currently, no.
I know we're getting close to time. I've got a couple of questions. So the first question is, there was a mention of advancement in other subjects besides math, so science, social studies, in ELA. Are there plans to bring AMP, make a program like AMP available for elementary school students to help prepare them for further advancement in middle school and high school?
So currently, as Dr. Sheffield said, we're rolling this process down into the elementary level. For the last couple of years, we have looked at AMP specifically at the elementary schools in a similar way to this. Excuse me. The conversation around elementaries in terms of, can you clarify your question about adding a program like AMP, or are you talking about?
Well, because AMP, as I understand, is focused on math. So is there something being brought about to enable advancement starting at an early age or earlier age in science, social studies, English language arts? Right now, the program that I'm aware of that students sometimes use is they will take classes on FLVS. But is there something within a classroom that would enable them to move forward and be better prepared for middle school advancement in science or middle school advancement in social studies, which would then prepare them for that further advancement in high school?
So in terms of elementary, the conversation, AMP exists, primarily because there is an accelerated math pathway where you go through the, algebra and geometry before you get out of elementary or middle school. The conversation right now around the elementary piece for the ELA, the science, the social studies is around building a more rigorous curriculum across the board and a more rigorous expectation across the board in those three subject areas in an effort to better prepare students across the board for advanced coursework in sixth grade, as opposed to starting to bifurcate classes earlier and earlier, where you're basically, because if you start bifurcating, say, social studies in fourth grade, you've got one group of kids that you're preparing extra, as opposed to trying to make everybody prepared for that acceleration once they hit sixth grade, and that differentiation is more evident in the coursework.
Okay, I hear you. I just realized that there could be students, for example, in science or, and I assume also as well in social studies, et cetera, that would benefit from that possible advancement, and that it should be obviously offered equitably. Another question I have is, you'd mentioned the percentage with potential enrollment in courses and when, so my question is, when is enrollment determined? Is it at the beginning of the year or is it during the FTE count? When is that figured out? Because it's particularly, I'm particularly curious about this in terms of ESE students, because when are we counting that percentage of students as being enrolled? Are there students who start off the school year with a schedule that has these advanced courses, and then they're not getting sufficient supports and in order to be successful within those courses, and perhaps there's a teacher or somebody who's discouraging them from dropping the course. So that's where I'd like to find out more information about that. So when you're bringing back the ESE information, I'm hoping we can also take a look at that.
So in terms of in terms of the snapshots of data in this slide, the snapshot is from January, but of each of these 3 years, because that's kind of when we look at the AP potential specifically, kind of as that process is starting. But in terms of these data, again, these are snapshots in time, but we actually track the data starting in January when the Masterboard process starts. And then once the course requests are put into the student information system, we track, every month or so through the April, May, June window. Then when the course schedules start to populate, we'll track probably every 2 weeks or so between the July and the start of the school year. And then, as I said, and this is new this year, actually. We started tracking the data on the 11-day count. So basically on count day, did you enroll them then when school started? Did some come out? So we looked at count day. We'll be looking again at the end of about a week after first quarter is over. And then again, the annual cycle starts in January. So basically at the end of second semester. So we look to see, are students falling out at some point in the process, even if they might have been initially scheduled. So the way we've been doing this, the way we're doing this now, starting this current school year, is we look at the start of the master scheduling process, which is really a look at the end of the first semester of the prior year's master schedule process. Then we look a couple points in time through the request process to see, are students asking for the courses? Then we look a couple of times during the actual mechanical scheduling process where the school's building that master schedule to say, AP biology is period 2, and because, sometimes kids will fall out of courses because of conflicts. And then through the first semester, we look a couple of times, the start of the school year, the count day, and after first quarter, just to really kind of check and make sure students aren't coming out of the classes in large numbers that would be indicative of something to your point.
So if we could, when you come back, hopefully you will be able to come back. If we could take a look and get the information for the data, let's say of course enrollment, like just before the school year starts, the course enrollment at the end of the 10-day count, and the course enrollment at the beginning of the second quarter.
Mm-hmm.
That would be great. Okay, and then I have another question.
Hey, Laura,
One more question. I just
we're at that
doesn't answer it, but
7:15
I'm hoping
mark.
the information can come back. So the question I have is, we talked about what these classes are, but I know from prior looks at what classes are offered across the school district, we do not have equitable access to higher level science and math classes and computer science classes across the district. So I'm just hoping that information can be brought back as well.
Certainly.
Thank you so much. And I realize we are over time, and I thank you for everyone's patience. And Dr. Sheffield, if you have anything else.
No, I appreciate it. I just hate that, these were two big topics here. We spent a lot of time with the ESC and then, of course, with the Masterboard and understanding the process and what we are doing here as a district, as we realize that we do have some gaps. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. Do we need to do better as a district? Absolutely. But to see these cadence and pieces in terms of what we're looking at in terms of making informed decisions, and to make certain that we're setting our students up for success and can sustain. Because, you can play with data, manipulate data, and make the numbers look good all you want. But at the end of the day, I want the data to be authentic. I want it to be real. And I want it to where our students are going to be able to sustain and we're setting them up for success. So I just appreciate both groups coming out and sharing with us the processes and things that we have in place. And I can't stress enough that, again, nothing is perfect. And we just continue to navigate in this space. And around the whole ESC piece, I just want to, just caution us when we invite our guests out and they're sharing, that we sometimes, it's not what we say, but it's how we're saying it, and understand that we're working together as a team. And it's going to take everyone, right? And around some of this, and most importantly, I have to tell you, because I'm living it every day, that within the past year and a half, 2 years, a lot of what we're getting, it is by word of mouth, or sometimes it's in the press before we get it. And so we have to be very careful when we go to make informed decisions. Myself personally, I call it the white paper. I like to get it in writing and to make certain that the decisions and, the cadence that we're setting up, that it is actually what it is, because things are very fluid. It is changing periodically. And, it's just that space that we're in right now. So, we're going to continue to work here. We have a lot of challenges, and we have a lot of work to do. So, I appreciate each of you for getting on with us this evening. Laura, reach out to Diane, because we definitely have to talk about, we need to finalize the agenda for next month. And then when we're doing the agenda, I think in terms of looking at the item that we're putting on, maybe we need to go to one item, depending on what we're putting on, to where we can allow the group to have full discussion. I feel bad having to cut off, but, it's been when we change the time, I said it has to be a 7:15 hard stop.
Well, thank you very much for everybody for staying and for coming out and for participating. Greatly appreciated. And I will definitely speak with Diane so we can organize the agenda for next month. And I think it's a great idea that we have one topic so we can really dive into it. Thank you so much. If you all have any suggestions of topics that you want covered in the future, please feel free to email them to Diane so we can put together a list and prioritize them. Thank you so much, and have a great night, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.